everyone. So today we are going to do, or I'm going to do a lecture on the Silk Roads. And this is just kind of like a basic introduction to what they were and why they were significant. Okay. And you can either take notes in your notebook or you can use the guided notes worksheet that's on Canvas for you. Either one is fine. Okay, so the Silk Road or the Silk Roads is the name given to the huge network of trade routes, mostly land trade routes, between the Mediterranean, so Europe, and East Asia. So all across from basically like Italy, through the Middle East, across Central Asia, and into China. They were both mostly land, but also some water routes as well, covered more than 4,600 miles. And it was used from about the 2nd century BCE to about the 15th and 16th century CE. So thousands of, over 1,000 years of the Silk Roads being used for trade routes across Europe and Asia. So you can see here, right, the red lines are the trade routes. Some go through the Middle East here, some go above the Caspian Sea, right, through Turkey into Arabia, and then some water routes through the Red Sea up to the Arabian Sea and around India and Indonesia there. Okay, so why is it called the Silk Road or the Silk Roads? So basically, scholars say that the Romans first encountered silk, the fabric, on a campaign against a nation called the Parthians around 53 BCE. And they realized that this silk couldn't have been produced by the Parthians. And they learned that it had come from the East, right? And silk was mainly produced in China, and it was kept secret how it was produced for a very long time. And actually, if you don't know, silk is produced, it's woven from the thread from silkworms that only grow on and eat a certain kind of tree that grows native to China. So silkworms were native to China, and the secret of how silk was made was kept secret so that China could basically have a monopoly on the silk trade. Right? Silk became very popular in Rome for its soft texture and its beauty. It's a very beautiful fabric, right? And so Romans wanted more silk, and they basically went east and explored the route east to try and obtain and buy the silk for a lower price than they could get it from other people. And so that was kind of the origins of these Silk Roads, and that was the kind of the first connection across the from Europe over into Asia. It was primarily used, at least by the Romans, for silk, although they also got many other goods from Central Asia, from China, and from India as well. And although we call it the Silk Roads, silk was certainly not the only thing that was traded or traveled across the Silk Roads. Okay, so let's talk about some of those things. So first, let's think about this vocabulary word, the word commodity. So take a moment and just write a definition based off your previous knowledge. So what do you think a commodity is? Okay. So the dictionary definition of a commodity is an article of trade or commerce, especially a product as distinguished from a service. So basically, it's a tangible thing that you can buy, sell, or trade, right? Like silk, like books, like furs, like metal, like spices, right? All of those are examples of commodities. It is not a service. It's not something you do for something else. It's a thing, right? And so silk was not the only commodity traded along these land and water routes. To just cover a few, right, from the east, from China and Central Asia, were traded furs, ceramics, especially like ceramic dishes and plates, jade, which is that lovely green stone, bronze, lacquer, and iron, right? All very things that were either precious or very useful. From the west, from Europe, came gold and other precious metals like silver and copper. Ivory from Africa. Ivory is the tusk of an elephant. Gems and glass. right? And not only commodities traveled along the Silk Roads, but also intangible things, right? Like ideas, religions, especially Buddhism, was spread along the Silk Roads, medical knowledge, right? Scientific and technological innovations. And like when we looked at the Abbasid Caliphate last week, right? That's one of the reasons that Baghdad and the caliphates were really the center of knowledge for so many years, was because they were really the center of these Silk Roads. So they were kind of at the middle of all these ideas and technologies and products and people coming in from both the East and the West. And that's what really made them so successful. Okay, so it's kind of tempting to think of merchants traveling across the whole route all the way from Europe into China, but that's not what they did. Mostly merchants who used like horses or camels would transport their goods between two essentially cities or commercial centers, right? They would go from one city to another and then they would sell their goods in that city. And then they would take goods from that city and go back to the other, right? And they would sell them to other merchants. So these commodities would kind of leapfrog from city to city across the Silk Roads, primarily because that's a long way to travel on foot or by horse, right? Or by sailing ship when you don't have other ways to travel. So they would travel basically from city to city and go back and forth. Okay, so the Silk Road trade routes were driven really by three main factors, and we're just going to talk about them. The first was probably the most obvious one, a desire for profit. The second was a fascination with the exotic. And the third thing was a way to enhance the political power of a society. So all three of those things really contributed to the existence and then the continuation of the use of these Silk Roads for 1,000 years. Okay, so take a moment and think about the ways you think people could profit from trade along the Silk Roads. How could they get money from this trade? So the primary way people made money was selling unique goods to people not familiar with them. So taking a good maybe from China and selling it in Europe, where they wouldn't maybe have access or have seen that commodity before. And that could provide more income than selling the goods locally, right? Because like if you take something from China and sell it in China, those people have more access to it, so you can't charge a high price. But if you take something from China and sell it in Rome, right, you can charge a higher price because the demand for that item is higher because it's more desirable, it's more unique, it's rarer, right? And then the middlemen along the route, right, the people who would kind of leapfrog these goods from city to city would also profit by the transport of goods. They would take it from one city, buy it, and then sell it in a higher price in the next city. And kind of the price would go up the further away you got from the origin of this product, right? So something that didn't cost a lot in Rome would cost a lot in China and the other way around. Okay. The second thing that drove the Silk Roads, the trade on the Silk Roads, was the fascination with the exotic. So the Silk Roads provided a route for items to travel very long distances to places where the items were not available, right? So this was a way for people to really experience the world in ways they really could, right? Most people didn't travel really more than, probably 30 or 40 miles outside the place they were born ever, right? People didn't really interact with other kinds of people a lot of the time unless they lived in maybe a major city or a trade port. So this was really a way for people to interact with the world and with other, cultures and ideas and philosophies that were outside of their experience, right? And as well as commodities, right? Silk was exotic to Europeans and Middle Easterners. They had never seen it before. And things like amber and opium were exotic to the Chinese who had never seen them before, right? So this desire to experience and have things from other cultures really drove the Silk Roads. And then the last thing we'll just touch on is enhancing the political power of a society. right? So a society, the Silk Roads provided, in one of the ways, a really easy route for soldiers to invade other territories without having to make their own paths, right? Because these paths from city to city were already traveled, and so cultures and nations could use these routes to invade other territories. And also, if you were a center of trade or of ideas or learning, like Baghdad was for the Abbasid Caliphates, right? It also could make your empire or nation richer because trade came there and people made more money, right? And so you could have more political power. Okay. All right, that's it. Super short and easy. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you next time.